my pleasure to be here. I came to this museum for the first time about 8 months ago, and I was really impressed, blown away actually. This museum kind of swings above its weight, I think, for a little town like Angels Camp to have such a great museum. And I was surprised in the lower building to find the gem mineral display and some fossil specimens in there as well. And Martin and I got to talking a little bit about maybe at some point curating a small exhibit here, including some of the finds from the site. Maybe not the actual specimens. What we do now with the 3D print technologies, we can actually make exact replicas, and that way the priceless fossils stay under lock and key or in the repository, but we can put the replicas out. So maybe we'll get a chance to do something like that. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So I have a slide presentation. I also brought in some specimens, so I encourage everybody to come up and take a look at the eye candy up here. I've got some stuff that I'm actually working on, like right here. This is fresh out of the prep lab. This is a foot bone from a giant camel, which I'll talk more about in the presentation, but just have some other random stuff that I grabbed. And there's things here you can handle if you've never handled an 8-million-year-old fossil before. Here's your chance right here to take a look at this. So I am a ranger with East Bay Mud. I work in the Mokelumne watershed. Our office is based out of the Valley Springs area. As Joe mentioned, I typically am on a patrol unit. In the summer of 2020, peak COVID pandemic time when everything was weird, we actually had our trails and recreation closed down, and then we opened back up and things went bonkers. We had just thousands and tens of thousands of people come up to recreate and use the trails and whatnot. But I happened to be out on patrol in July of 2020, and I stumbled upon some paleontology remains, right place at the right time kind of thing. And Mokelumne watershed, right here. This is a photo by Dave Bunnell, who's sitting in the back here, and this is a photo that Dave took from the Mokelumne Crest Trail, and in particular a spot called Patty's Point, which is on the longest mile. If you haven't hiked there yet, it's like a Stairmaster about that steep. Hi, Stacy. Yeah, give it a visit sometime, and especially during wildflower season. That's an incredible walk. But so this is Patty's Point looking west down the channel. So this would technically be Party Reservoir. That's right under us there.
Is there that much water there now?
Actually, maybe a little bit lower, but Party's actually doing pretty good in terms of the storage right now. So the Comanche Party reservoirs are on here. This isn't going to work on the screen. So Comanche Reservoir, Party above it, and then you see the upper watershed. So up in here where the fingers are, that would be the Blue Lakes area, Ebbets Pass, Hermit Valley, that type of thing up here. So right up your road here, Highway 4, right, gets you up into this country. And we're going to talk more about this. Ebbets Pass is actually pretty important to the geological story of our site. The different forks of the Mokelumne gather together, go down into Party Reservoir. That is where the drinking water comes out of and goes down the pipeline system to the East Bay area. About 90 miles of gravity-fed pipelines, and then the water's pumped up from Walnut Creek into Briones and San Pablo reservoirs, and then it's distributed to about 1.6 million customers that drink the Sierra Nevada water. Okay. Okay, so site security, rule number one. So the most common question I get from locals especially is, where is the site? And so I refer to rule number one, which is in paleontology, we typically don't talk about it, and that is for the site security. This slide that I drew up, when I first saw that, it looked like my great uncle Milt, but Charles Darwin there, helping to keep the secret, right? So people try in a lot of different ways to kind of get it out of us on exactly where it is, and ask if at some point we're going to give public tours of the site. Very unlikely that's going to happen down the road just because of the sensitivity of the site. But I will tell you it's somewhere on the East Bay Mud watershed, so that narrows it down to about 30,000 acres. Yes, sir?
How big is the site actually overall?
Yeah, that's part of rule number one, but I'll tell you, it's the footprint is certainly, say, bigger than this room or bigger than maybe even this property. It's a pretty good site, and it's actually spread out a bit. So it's not like maybe some of the fossil sites you visited where the quarry is compact and they've built a building over it and they're kind of going down layer by layer. It's a little more spread out. They're mostly fluvial or river deposits that have carried these bones in, ancient river deposits that have carried these bones into place. Okay, so July of 2020, the first thing that I came across that kicked off this whole adventure was petrified trees. And although not this exact one, but very similar to that was like the first one that I found. Was a little surprised to find that. We hadn't recorded any such remains in that location. It is known of petrified wood in, say, Calaveras County and in the region. In fact, there's a lot of it on display here in the museum. Ebbets Pass area, up near the Dardanelles, different places down the Mokelumne Channel, you can find remains like this. In fact, all the way down pretty heavily to about Salt Springs Reservoir. But in particular where this site is, it was a bit of a surprise. I started a little more of an organized survey at that point, and for about 3 weeks I was logging these area of these trees that I found, and then I found the first vertebrate fossils. And this vertebrate meaning bone, and these are the actual first bones that I found. And obviously they look different than the petrified wood. I reached out to a paleontologist friend of mine who confirmed what I was looking at. And as I expanded my survey of the area, started to get into more significant bones like this. So same bone on both sides of the slide there. On the left, you'll see generally what it looked like when I found it. So like a cannon sticking out of the bank there. And then this photo on the right is when we were actually excavating out of the ground. Yes, sir?
What the surround is of the fossils is essentially alluvial stream bed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Of different types at the site. So it's not just one type of sediment. There's a variety from softer to harder stuff. The digging can be easy, it can be hard. And what it does is it represents the different events that wash down the ancient Mokelumne channel, the Paleo channel, or what I call the Proto-Mokelumne.
Do you know what species it is that you're looking
Actually, yes. So this is probably an ulna from a gomphotherium, and a gomphotherium is an ancestral elephant. And I'm going to talk more about that. Did you know that we had elephants in North America? So including the mastodons and the mammoths, there were gomphotheriums, which were more directly in line of the family tree of what became modern elephant. And this was a small gomphothere. So, and we don't think it was probably a juvenile or a subadult. The entire bone is not there, and that's because this end of it was chewed off or chewed up by the probably bone-crushing dogs before it was buried about 8 million years ago. There's teeth marks in it. In fact, a lot of the specimens that come out of the ground have teeth marks in it. And when you get a chance after the presentation, come up and take a look at this, and you'll see the teeth gouges in there.
So you were just up there working and walking around, and this is what you found?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So you weren't
What
really
is your
looking.
background? How did you know what you were even looking
Yeah, I'm not a paleontologist and I'm not a geologist. My geology background consists of about 12 units, maybe mostly of electives. So, but I have enough sort of background with it that I pretty much knew what I was looking at. I understand the local geology pretty well as a naturalist that works in the area. I have a little bit of paleontology background before this from underwater paleontology in the cenotes in Mexico, involved in a project there, paleontology and archaeology. But this kicked off a huge period of time for me, which has been nonstop, over 600 days on site, working with paleontologists and geologists. So it's been an intensive education since then. Yes.
When this happened, you say 600 days on site. Did eBay Mud fund that, or how did funding happen for that?
Yeah. So
was there people who were excited to fund it? Is what I'm wondering.
So the funding is tricky. So East Bay Mud does fund my part of it for the most part. And as a ranger, there's sort of a theme when you're a ranger, and we say you catch it, you clean it. So whatever it is, you get involved in whatever investigation or whatever hazardous material spill or whatever, you run with it and you see it through the end. And it's been kind of that way with this. So COVID had a lot to do with this project being constructed or developing the way that it has, which has actually been fantastic, where I've been able to be the project coordinator and not have a university come in and sort of take the whole thing over, and East Bay Mud just kind of lets it go that way. So at the time when this occurred, the universities were on lockdown basically because of COVID. For the most part, they weren't letting their staff out in the field. The museums weren't working, that type of thing. So we kind of had to do what we could for a period of time, and it worked. It developed into a really good relationship that we have.
So you're the sole person that finds this, or do you have paleontologists and archaeologists coming in?
We also have paleontologists and biologists and geologists that work on site, but I'm sort of the lead on it, and probably 90% of the specimens are things that I found, and I'm on site every day when any work's being done. Kind of a control freak that way, I guess. Okay, so I introduced you a little bit to the team, who I'm real proud of and like to brag on them a bit. So when that discovery happened in July of 2020, we did start reaching out to get some professional help, and our first phone call was to UC Berkeley. And they said, sorry, nobody's going out in the field. We can't help you out. It sounds interesting, but there's nothing we can do. So we went with one of our scientific contractors, environmental science associates. They normally handle archaeology type stuff for us, but they did have a couple of paleontologists they could call, and it turns out they called Dr. Russell Shapiro, who is from CSU Chico. And Russell came out to the site about 3 weeks later, and he said, I have 8 hours where I can be on site. And I told him, I'll do my best to show you what we've got in 8 hours. Well, 12 hours later, I wasn't able to show him everything, and his mind was kind of blown. He said, you have a very, very important site here. We need to start excavating as soon as possible, get this stuff protected and get it out of the ground. So Dr. Shapiro is a geologist and a paleontologist, and not only does he dig bones out of the ground with us, but he's involved in things like he was the panel chief on the NASA program for the Mars rover Perseverance, which is up there now, and his group decided what life forms they might be looking for, what type of tools and equipment they'll put on the rover, and how those things are going to recover those specimens. So he studies some of the oldest life forms that are on the planet. So he's pretty well qualified to work out here. CSU Chico, and he's a department chair up there in the geology department. Two of my main partners out on the site, Professor Charles Daly on the left and Professor Dick Hilton on the right, and they both have taught paleontology and geology for about 50 years, recently retired, 79 and 80 years old. They come out and work in the field with us. They'll put in an 8 or 10 hour day side by side with us out in the heat. And so what you see here, again, similar to that other bone that I showed, this is kind of typically how we do it. We excavate down and around the specimen and then work our way into it. And we'll usually take a chunk of the ground out with the specimen to protect it. Sometimes we'll do plaster and burlap jacket over it. Other times we'll use heavy tin foil and duct tape. We use everything from dental picks to hammer and chisel, the knuckle busting kind of work, to what you see here, like a concrete saw. Whatever makes the work the easiest, but yet we want to protect the fossil. So as we get in closer, we'll typically do more of the finer handwork.
Do they ever get broken just trying to get them out?
They do. That's a great question. So one thing I learned early is you're going to break fossils. You do your very best to not, but sometimes there's no way around it. The fossils break. We've gotten a lot better at it. I'm pretty picky about how we do it at our site. I've learned a lot of ways not to do it. You break stuff and then you get better at it. So
follow on to that question, what's the composition of the fossils now? The calcium is leached out, they're not bones anymore?
they're not bones anymore.
What
There's
mineral are these? Is it a very soft mineral? Or?
mostly silica, things that were in the fluvial material from volcanic eruptions. And that's where we're going to tie into Ebbets Pass in a minute, yeah. So, and afterwards, be sure and, check these out. I can pass it around. You see how hard that is. I have one 3D printed one here.
Oh, these are the actual, and this is
Yeah,
3D printed.
that is.
Oh, so this is
yeah.
a lot lighter.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Montana Hodges on the left, Kathy Busby on the right. I have a group of slides I call Women Who Rock, and these are so this was a really cool moment. So when Montana was younger, she's 30 years old now, I think. When she was younger, she attended a talk from Dr. Kathy Busby to help inspire her career a little bit. And now they're working together out on our site. And this was the first time they had met in person since years prior when Montana first met Kathy. So it was pretty neat. So Kathy Busby on the right, she is a world's expert on Sierra Nevada volcanism and related tephra sort of studies on that. And she is heading up part of our geochronology study at the site.
Question?
Yes.
What did you say her name was?
Kathy Busby?
Busby.
Yeah, recently retired from UC Davis, although I think she still keeps an office there and has some students that she's working with. But yeah, and Russell Shapiro, our lead, was Kathy's teaching assistant at UC Santa Barbara, Dave, back in the 1980s. So there's this grapevine of scientists that all, sort of tie back in together. Mike Higley, who is a fossil expert and master fossil preparer, and he is up in Redding, California. And Mike, kind of like myself, without a formal background and training in the field, but he's actually quite sought after on the fossil sites. The scientists will often defer to Mike when looking at a bone. Mike, what is it? What was it from? And how are we going to prepare it? And he does some of the best work in Northern California on fossils. And Dr. Jeanette Perlow. Jeanette, originally from Escalon, California. She had her education, which took her out to Florida. She was at the Florida Museum of Natural History. She flew back out here a couple times to come visit our site and to work on some of our remains, our elephant remains. And she just now started at CSU Stanislaus in Turlock. And she is an assistant professor of evolutionary biology. And we're really excited to have her back local. And we're teamed up on a number of projects now at the site. Okay, and here's a little longer list of some of the important folks that are working on the project. I couldn't fit everybody in one slide, so I had to kind of pick and choose there. And our sort of core cadre is in the bold there on the top left.
Have you ever added up all their years of education?
No, I haven't done that. That would be...
How many of these,
Yeah, but a lot of world's experts, really, in particular specialties, If we have say with our camels, we'll reach out to the fossil camel experts and get them involved. Okay, so who's who in the zoo? So early on in the project, this artwork by Anton Mauricio really caught my eye because this is how I was visualizing the late Miocene site that we have with some grassland, some forested areas. Definitely there's water involved. And it turns out that for a while I was able to say that we have all of these animals out at the site except this one, and that one I was saying we're going to pretend it's a tapir because we did find a tapir. But we do know we had the bone-crushing dogs. We have horses, at least 2 species. We've got pronghorn antelope. We've got rhinos, probably 2 species. And we've got the gomphotheres, which are the 4-tusked elephants. And we also have mastodons.
How many elephants?
Pardon?
How many elephants do you have?
How many individuals? Quite a few. We're not sure because a lot of them are parts and how related each part is to the other. Gomphotheres, mastodons, I could safely say more than half a dozen. And yeah.
With the sound of it all being mixed together, do you think this is from an eruption causing a cascade to come down and wipe everything out at once and bury it? So it's an event site from one or a couple events? It's not like the stream bed over time, it's a one deluge event?
Great question. So, and did those events, so there were events, there were volcanic events, and those volcanic eruptions came down the Paleo Channel, mixed with the fluvial and the river sediments, and we're finding that where a lot of the burials are, they're overbank flood events, over braided stream channels. That flood material came up like that and buried the bones. But the big question is, did those events kill the animal that it buried? Probably not. Because what we're finding is that for large part, these bones are separate and individual. They're not complete animal burials. We think that these animals maybe were dead already. They stick around for a little while. The bone-crushing dogs and other critters will kind of pick them apart and chew on the bones a little bit, and then the burials happened. We're finding so many of the bones that have already been, I call them ABC, already been chewed, bones before they were buried. So that's an excellent question. You're thinking kind of in the right direction, but it's not like some of the fossil sites, maybe the ashfall site in Nebraska, where the ash, the ash was the event that killed the animals and buried them. Pompeii kind of stuff. But
Why the bones are so scattered.
that's right.
Yeah.
So complete articulated skeletons, we're not really seeing it other than the most complete one actually that we found is a fish about this big, missing part of the head, but the rest of it is there.
I'm assuming from the picture there were no mammoths in this area?
There were mammoths in this area. Yeah, and we're going to get into that because the Calaveras County Museum has a tusk that may be from a mammoth. But we don't have any at our site. And this site was before mammoth. So mastodons and gomphotheres.
Is that horse on the right?
That is a horse. Yep. Okay, preliminary faunal list. I actually need to update this a little bit, but we've got mastodon, and we don't have anything ID'd down to species level yet. We're still working on it, and that doesn't mean that everything is going to be a new species. It just means that we haven't matched it with anything. It's already known, and if it is something new, we haven't described it to that level yet. So we've got mastodon, gomphothere, rhinoceros, tortoise, giant land tortoises, which is Hespero testudo is the tortoise we have, and it probably looked very much like the Galapagos tortoise that still exists today. If you go to the San Diego Zoo, you can see their big Galapagos tortoises there. Horses, probably 2 species, at least 2 species, fish, bird, pronghorn, dog. I put a question mark behind that because we're still figuring that out. Mustelid, something like a wolverine or a marten. We haven't decided for sure on that. Tapir. And hot off the press, as of Tuesday of this week, we ID'd some of the long bones that we have as from a peccary. So in that Anton Mauricio artwork, that pig on the left that I was calling a tapir, that now matches. It's a peccary. Yeah. So a quick recap on your high school biology, right? So here's the classification of living things. We have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then down into the species. And I'm using mastodon there as an example. So where are we in geologic time on this project? Again, we'll go back to high school geology for you. So here we have 0 to about 66 million years ago, and then our site, late Miocene in the red box there, roughly. So, and the reason this Cenozoic era starts at about 66 million years ago, anybody know what thought happened 66 million years ago? Yeah, maybe a big asteroid, kind of a reset button maybe for life on the planet. Sort of the common theory is that there was a big asteroid that hit near where the Yucatan Peninsula is. Major event on Earth, wiped out, depending on who you talk to, maybe 98, 99% of life on Earth. That was kind of the end of the reign of dinosaurs, the giant reptiles, and then the Cenozoic became the time of the mammals. And the mammals started small and got bigger and bigger, and a lot of them were at their largest in the late Miocene into the Pliocene and then the Pleistocene. So really not late Miocene, we're right around 8 million years ago on our site, not that long ago. Just kind of a blink in time, right? So to talk about the mastodon, I haven't found artwork that I really like. This was the best thing so far, but I'm going to end up drawing my own. But our mastodons probably weren't furry, and they probably weren't that muscular like a power lifter. But you generally get the idea there. The remains that we have a lot of teeth, skull pieces, and tusks. And this particular mastodon specimen I found on New Year's Day in 2021, and it looked like this, but there was more sediment and some weeds kind of over it. But what caught my eye were the teeth poking up like that, and a little bit of the tusk right here was visible. And I kind of brushed around it. And actually that day in the field, I wasn't really intending to look for anything. I was out picking up some GPS coordinates from some previous work we were doing. I happened to walk right across this spot and saw it just in the right light or whatever, and and saw those teeth. And so this is after we've brushed it out. So when I found this, I just texted some photos to the partners, and within about 30 seconds, I started getting replies, and what is it? Where is it? And within 3 days, the band was back together, and we were out here on site. So these sheets of paper that are here are with some photos we brought of mastodon teeth to try and match it up, and then a drawing of Gomphothere teeth and a 3D model of a Gomphothere tooth. And it was almost immediately identifiable as mastodon. The teeth are quite a bit different in the mastodon. The word mastodon means nipple tooth, and that describes the pointed, high ridged cusps on the mastodon teeth as opposed to the Gomphotheres. So this is farther on in the excavation, and that is one of the tusks inside of that plaster jacket. And Dr. Shapiro there, we were wearing masks out in the field, and that's a kind of a marker in time, in these photos, as we were still well into the COVID event, and everybody's wearing masks out in the field. So what's going on in this photo is we've excavated around the specimen, and that tusk is still in the sediment, and that sediment is still attached to the ground. So we've dug around it, we've plaster jacketed it, and we put a plank in the top there to strengthen it. And what we're getting ready to do is to pop that entire pedestal off the ground. We've drilled holes through the base of it. We've made these steel plates that we use, and we tap them in and try and tap them equally until the whole thing pops off the ground. That pedestal weighed about 375 pounds. So we pop it off the ground, and then we lay a cargo net in the pit, and we roll it over so it's sitting on top of the plank, what's now the top of the jacket, we roll it over, and then the bottom is exposed, and we plaster jacket that, dry it with hair dryers and stuff out in the field. And then in this case, it took 8 people to lift that cargo net out of the ground, and then we do a caterpillar, carry up the hill and get it into the pickup truck, and then it goes off to the lab.
Is that casting material like you would use for cast for?
It's plaster of Paris that you can go buy at Ace Hardware.
Okay.
Yeah, and we use burlap sacks. You tear the burlap sacks into strips, you soak them in the wet plaster, and you put them on the specimen. We usually put something over the specimen, paper towels and things first, and then the burlap goes on. So that's how we do the larger ones and maybe the more fragile ones. And other specimens for time, I just get heavy aluminum foil from Walmart and heavy duct tape, and we wrap them in foil and duct tape, and they'll come out of the ground good like that. Yeah, good question. So I've built a small fossil prep lab at my house. So a lot of the specimens come out and go to my house. I live in Jackson. And the other lab is at Chico State University at the Gateway Science Museum on the Chico State campus. If you're familiar with Chico, the museum is next to the Bidwell Mansion.
So if we wanted to go see some of the fossils from this site, we could go to Chico?
You could. So we have an exhibit at the Gateway Science Museum that we opened up last year. And we have those tusks. We have that skull that I just showed you with the teeth in it. We have a gomphothere jaw and maybe about 50 other specimens that are in there. Yeah, did you have a question also, ma'am?
I was wondering, the plaster of Paris, how is it removed later so that it doesn't?
Yeah, we just cut through it with Dremel tools usually, and cut it into pieces. In example, if this one was plastered, I would cut my way around it and kind of remove it as a lid, and often we'll leave it in the tub of plaster on the bottom to give it strength.
Do your neighbors know what you're doing?
Yeah, some of them do, but late nights they hear bzzz going on from my place.
What does your HOA think?
Yeah. And then some of the big specimens, I've recruited my neighbors to lift these things out of my truck and onto the dollies, you know, to get them into the garage, and people are like, yeah. And the local kids think it's neat. I get the kids riding up on their bikes and, what do you have today? What are you working on? You know, and that's really fun. Sharing this with people is like the second best part of this for me, other than digging them out of the ground, and is being able to share the natural history of the area.
With the petrified tusks and bones, have you found any that don't have the silica in them that maybe they could get DNA from?
No, not at 8 million years ago. The tusk I'm going to talk about that's at the Calaveras Historical Society Museum is not petrified, and we're going to do a carbon date on it and maybe some other interesting things because it's not petrified. Good question. But yeah, there's no DNA present in these to do anything like that. But there is a lot of neat science that we're getting done.
You have a lab at your house. What does that consist of? How can you have a lab?
I know. Well, so myself and my family are really into skiing, and we had we wax and tune our own skis and race skis for the race kids and stuff, and that all went away, and that became the fossil lab. And scientists that I'm working with have donated equipment. I've bought some equipment. I've got microscopes and all the tools and things in about a 600 square foot shop now, which has become the Paleo Lab. And actually, it's a pretty capable little lab that I've got. We were able to get a lot of work done there. I had European TV crew come and spend 3 days with me. They're filming for a documentary, a 5-part series that they're doing. And they came and filmed there and filmed at the house and filmed my family. We're eating dinner, and they do all that B-roll stuff where they kind of follow you around, and they did drone shots in the neighborhood. And my neighbors were wondering what was going on when they came, and the big cameras and tripods are set up in the driveway and stuff like that. So this is up at the Gateway Science Museum. The Paleo Lab there is visible for the public. It's called a demo lab, and there are large windows that slide open, and folks can come right up to the glass and see what's being worked on, ask questions and things like that. And so the skull that I showed you in the previous photo, that's it right there. And here's some tusks. And we had to actually cut those tusks off from the skull to be able to get it out of the ground. It was a hard decision we made, but it was determined that there was no way we were going to get the whole thing out in one piece without it possibly breaking in ways and in places that we didn't want it to break. So I was elected as the one to take the big concrete saw, and we snapped a chalk line across those tusks and cut them off, and then jacketed those separately, and there they are. So I cut these tusks off, and then Professor Daly said, "You're going to hell for that." for cutting those things off, just, joking. And then I said, "Well, who else here has ever cut tusks off?" And nobody had ever done it, but it's just what we had to do.
So is the skull come out?
Yeah.
Did you then go back for the skull?
We got them out basically at the same time. It took about a week to get both of these out of the ground. I think 160 hours we put in field work to get that excavated. And it was neat. Where this was buried, there was a lot of plant material, paleobotany, that was tangled up like with the tusks. So trees and woody material that had been fossilized. And resting up against one of the tusks. So this particular sediment is a clay stone, and we were getting it out in sort of chunks about that big. It was a lot of hammer and chisel work as we got in closer. And when we would take those chunks out, we would look at them and maybe pop it open and break it down a little further and look at it and see what we had. At one point, I popped a chunk out. I handed it to Professor Hilton. He looked at it. He popped it in half, and it went like that, and we had two sides of a bird. And that split he did had split the bird right down the medial like that, and it went bink like that. And it was a bird minus the head. And that bird, the height of the body minus the head was the size of 1.5 pennies. I don't remember the measurement in centimeters, but really small. Maybe the size of the smallest hummingbird that you'd see around here. So Dr. Alyssa Bell, who now is down at, I think she's working at La Brea Tar Pits. She's a fossil bird expert. She's going to be trying to figure out who that bird was. But it's not, so my point is it's not just the bones. It's other things that might be there. The paleobotany is really important. The plants tell us a lot about what the climate was like and what these animals might have been eating. And then little tiny things like the rodent teeth, the small microvertebrate type of thing. So that's why you'll see people out at the sites like screening things, So you just don't want to get carried away. It's not only the big giant specimens. So one thing the project has done is it's allowed us to travel a bit. So to try and figure out who some of our critters are is we compare them to fossils that are in other collections. And recently I made a really great trip down to the Western Science Center, which is in Hemet, California, down by Temecula. I'm not sure if Hemet's all that much of a destination itself, but if you get down there and you're in that area, even to drive from San Diego to go to the museum at the Western Science Center is worth it. It's a fantastic museum. They have a 65,000 square foot repository where there's over 1 million fossil specimens in there. It's now becoming one of the more desirable repositories in Southern California to put things. But they have a massive collection of mastodons, mostly more recent in time than our mastodon, but we were able to go through and observe their collection and try and match up, what we found with their specimens. They've got a fantastic museum there. The nearby Diamond Valley Reservoir, when that was being excavated in, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, the bulldozers literally kicked up fossils, and they stopped work, tried to figure out what was going on, and they had a very significant Pleistocene Ice Age fossil site there where they collected over, I believe it's over 600,000 specimens have come out of there, and new species of mastodon and that type of thing.
Are they tied to a university?
No, although there's a lot of, I mean, they're affiliated with universities in the way that a lot of folks come and work here, and and they share information and stuff. But they're kind of their own little thing there at the Western Science Center, and they have a state-of-the-art 3D print lab, which was one of my reasons to go visit as well. So they're able to print like big stuff, and they're going to help us build life-size replicas and that type of thing of our specimens.
So you traveled with the originals instead of the 3D printers?
I had some originals with me and a lot of information on the laptop, and had some replicas. Yeah.
Seems like it'd be a lot easier to travel with the 3D printers.
It sure is, and it's less nerve-wracking too. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about Gomphothere. So the word Gomphothere means welded beast or iron beast, and as you'll see in this artwork, the larger Gomphotheres as represented here really resemble modern elephant, right? African elephant. There's 3 species of the proboscideans, the elephants that still exist on Earth. And the Gomphothere is directly in line of the family tree with what became modern elephant. And they did make their way here to North America and existed here for over 20 million years.
So 8 million years ago, the continents were essentially where they are now.
Yes. Sea levels were different, but for the most part, North America looks like it does. Yes, ma'am.
The tusks are going down.
Yeah.
No reason that
So tusks are teeth that have evolved, and for the most part, they're tools. So in the way that those animals were using their tusks as tools, the down-curved ones maybe for digging things out. So the Gomphothere uppers that we've recovered are mostly curved like this, have a downward curve to them. Very different, right, from modern elephant. And most Gomphothere species of a genus of Gomphotheres had 4 tusks, not 2. They had a set of uppers and a set of lowers that were usually smaller. And one way we can ID Gomphothere teeth or Gomphothere tusks different from mastodons is the uppers had a layer of enamel on them. And this is a section of tusk I found a couple months ago, and right away was able to tell that it was Gomphothere upper because of the enamel that's still on there. So the tusks have a lot of information in them, and one thing that can be done with the tusks is you can differentiate the families. So difference between modern elephant, mastodon, mammoth, and Gomphotheres by looking at the inside of the tusk. There's something called Schrager banding, and the angle on those Schrager bandings holds the key to which family it was in. And that's something actually that that's been used in modern times to differentiate African elephants for ivory poaching and that type of thing. The difference between ivory that came from rhinos or elephants. Look at that Schrager banding. And we're going to be doing that on the tusk that's over at the Historical Society Museum in San Andreas with the tusk that they have. So as we've been trying to figure out some of our specimens, one Gomphothere that we dug up, we have this fantastic mandible, this complete lower jaw and lower teeth, and that's it in that jacket on the left. And that is still attached to the ground in that photo. Again, it's that pedestal method where we jacket it and then we separate it from the ground. So right in that photo, what I'm doing in there is I'm hammering my way through the bottom of it, and then we're going to flip that thing over and jacket it. And so that lower jaw, that lower mandible, we then took it up to Mike Higley's lab in Reading, and here's when we had already cracked it open, but we were excavating our way down to expose the teeth, and here's where we're having look at it. And the gentleman on the far left there is Dr. David Lambert. He came out from Texas. He's been out here a couple times to look at our collection, and he is a world's expert on gomphotheres. And the teeth on this particular specimen were kind of confusing. Normally mastodon teeth and gomphothere teeth are different, and at a glance you can tell the difference. But this one had kind of a little bit of both to it, and we just weren't sure on what we had going. And we also found that this specimen, the lower jaw, instead of a gomphothere having a set of lower tusks here, it had a pair of tusks off of the chin, and it had a very long lower jaw sticking way out far, almost like a duckbill kind of thing, with those tusks sticking off the end. So it was really unusual and really different. We now, in the last couple of months, have determined that it was in the genus Gomphotherium. We weren't sure if it's Gomphotherium or Rhynchotherium, but we've now determined that the lower jaw is fairly straight, has a little bit of downturn, where Rhynchotherium had a radical downturn. So we've ruled out Rhynchotherium and gone with Gomphotherium.
Question?
Yes?
Dimensions wise, how much bigger were these than today's elephant?
Ah, good question. So than today's elephants, for the most part, the mastodons were bigger than gomphotheres, and the mastodons of the late Miocene were the size of maybe your smallest Asian elephant or the forest elephant species of modern elephants. So not that big, 10 feet tall maybe at the shoulders for the mastodons. Although ours, the one that I showed you with the pair of tusks that was in the museum, that might have even been a little bit smaller. This particular gomphothere is smaller even yet. It's kind of a mini gomphothere, maybe. This one was maybe 6 feet tall at the shoulders. And in terms, to give you an age comparison based on the development of the teeth and the wear on the teeth, this critter, to compare to a human age, might have been 18, 20 years old, sort of in comparison. So it's sub-adult, barely an adult, and about this tall. He could, in terms of height, could walk through that front door coming in, although the door would probably need to be a little bit wider, but about that big. And I've drawn a photo of what we think it looked like. But we've got absolutely beautiful teeth there. And there's some studies that we can do on the teeth by drilling in and sampling the enamel, and we can find out what the animal was eating. Some different information stored in that, which we're probably going to have the University of Florida do that for us. There's another view. So that long lower jaw I was telling you about, right there. Here's the molars back here.
When you're getting ready to lift this massive heavy thing out and take it to the pickup, it must be extremely nerve-wracking time for everybody.
It can be.
You don't drop it?
You don't drop it, and that it doesn't break while it's happening. Like this fracture, this may have happened in the process of us getting out of the ground. We're not sure. When we opened up the jacket and we worked our way down, that fracture was in there, so we may have broken that, or it may have already been that way in the ground. But this was another specimen that was, this was well over 300 pounds once we got the plaster on it. We actually used a backhoe on this one to lift it out, and then get it out to a pickup truck and put it in that way. But it is nerve-wracking, but you hope that your work along the way has protected it as much as possible, right? And then I'm, on a lot of these things, when we're excavating them, I want to leave a little bit more around it sometimes than the other folks do. They want, oh, let's shave down a little smaller on this thing. I'd rather have an extra 100 pounds on it to know I have more meat around the specimen. Better chance we're going to get into the lab without it sort of falling apart. We also can strengthen these when there's exposed bone. We can strengthen it while it's still in the ground. We use something called boot var, which is it's a polymer, plastic beads basically that we suspend in acetone and mix it together, and you basically give the bone a bath in that, and the acetone pulls it into the bone, and those beads lock together, and it's kind of like an internal glue. And it's one of the key steps actually in fossil prep. And I'll start doing that in the field sometimes right away when I find them. If there's bone exposed, I'll start putting the boot var on it, and that'll strengthen the bone considerably before we take it out of the ground. Did you have a question?
You mentioned a number of times that you've sent things this direction, that direction. You mentioned Florida, so you're sending things all over the country. Is there a lot of red tape involved in this? How do you manage this? Is the government involved? Do they
No.
say what you can and can't do?
Government's not involved. And in this case, East Bay Mud owns the land, so we decide what happens. If on your land you find a mastodon fossil, you can do whatever you want with it. Like in the Dakotas and Wyoming and Nebraska, the ranchers that own these large pieces of land, a lot of them are really into the fossil business now, and they've become amateur paleontologists, and they're digging these T-Rexes up and they sell them for large amounts of money or prepare them themselves for museums. So the government's not involved in that way. In terms of keeping track of things, so really good records, and then we do fossil loan agreements. So if a specimen's going to go somewhere, there's paperwork that says you're going to be responsible for it while you have it, and that type of thing.
You don't just put it on an airplane like Southwest Airlines?
No, if something has to go somewhere, it's going to go in my lap as carry-on. Yes, Elizabeth?
What's left in the enamel after this fossilization has occurred that enables you to tell what the animal has been eating?
So that is a stable isotope study, and not really in my wheelhouse, although I'm learning more about it, but it's a carbon-oxygen stable isotope study. And Dr. Jeanette Perlow, who just came out here to Stanislaus State, she is probably one of the experts in North America on that process. In fact, she has studied and drilled into more Gomphothere and mastodon teeth than anybody else alive. Yeah, so we're kind of in good hands in that way. But some determination can be made on whether it was C3 or C4 vegetation that those critters were eating. Is there another hand? Yes.
Greg, I wanted to ask, at time of year, all the pictures that we've seen, you're actually digging these out of the ground when the ground is like cement.
Yeah.
Does it make a difference at the time of year point them out?
No. So 110 degrees in the summer can be miserable, so really it's more weather. Some of the sediments maybe get a little bit softer if it's been saturated, if we're solidly in the winter season. But for the most part, the digging's just all about the same, Some of it is rock hard. Like the sediment that this Gomphothere came out of was a bloody battle inch by inch to get it out of the ground. It was in a conglomerate of cobbles that were essentially cemented together, not unlike chiseling through almost a slab here on the floor. And so we use, I showed you the power tools, the saws and stuff, and we'll use that as much as we can. And we have rotary hammer drills that we use and get in there. But then as you get closer, it gets down to, hammer and chisel stuff, and it goes really slow. And especially in the cobbles, because Newton's third law of motion, if you might still be a ways from the specimen, but if you shock into a cobble here, that cobble's against a cobble, which is against a cobble, and it'll go right through to the bone. And I've learned that the hard way, breaking stuff. So we dig out, kind of pull stuff away and get into it. And then again, leave enough meat around it that we're going to get it out. I wish we were in easy ground. I hear about these fossil sites where they use spoons and stuff to dig out the sediment. I'm like, boy, wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. Okay, here's my drawing of our little Gomphotherium. This is, it was probably a male, maybe 6 feet tall at the shoulders, and this is our best guess on what this critter looked like. I kind of changed it a bit as we went, having the Gomphothere experts and some elephant experts kind of steer me. And there's maybe one thing missing on it now is that it's been suggested that maybe the skin was still a little bit more flappy and kind of hanging down, a little bit more like you'd see on elephants today. Even the baby elephants have these flaps of skin hanging down, where our guy is a little more, he's been doing CrossFit, right? And he's pretty lean and buff there is how I drew him. But so maybe the skin's a little tight. But the ears are a little bit of a best guess. It suggested they were probably small. And nobody knows for sure how hairy or furry they were. We know during the Ice Age, stuff got pretty woolly. During the late Miocene, it was warmer than it is here. There were tortoises running around here. We may have had a climate here where it didn't frost 8 million years ago. So these gomphotheres may have had more skin like modern elephant you'd see in the African setting.
So there's no teeth on the lower part, they're back in.
The teeth are, yeah, they're kind of hidden back here.
They're all the way back there.
So those would be the molars. Yeah, this long lower jaw. And we're not exactly sure what this skin covering looked like over that long section. So modern elephants, the jaw's way back here, right? It looks like they have this huge underbite, and that's how a lot of the mastodons were as well. And then you get these gomphotheres with this crazy long jaw and the two tusks sticking off the end.
Line on the two little tusks, like where the skin came, but you don't have pieces of skin that show hair or anything like
No.
that.
No skin.
It doesn't.
It's a guess, yeah. So this, let's go back. So here's where those tusks come out off the chin, right there. So when we were excavating into here, you start to get into that. They look like cobbles. They look just like the cobbles that are still in the sediment, but then they go out like that, and it's like two pointed cigars sticking off the end.
One bone then that they stick out of?
Yes,
One
that's the jaw, the lower jaw.
So these would be descended from things that were in North America since Pangea, essentially.
No, these guys migrated in here. They came across a land bridge. They originated in Africa. Moatherium and Phosphotherium were thought to be those are the oldest fossil ancestors of elephant, and they were small. And they got bigger and worked their way up into Africa and into Asia, and then came over into North America.
So the woolly mammoths, that's the same thought process. They came over the Asian land bridge into Alaska.
Correct.
So these would have been an earlier migration across the Cimarron land bridge.
Correct. Yeah, and this that European documentary that I was involved in, one of the 5 episodes in the series is on the evolution of the elephant. And they came to film over with us to tell that story of how the elephants made their way here to North America. And they talk a lot about those different branches of the family tree. That's not, so that, unfortunately, that documentary might not show in North America. They made it for European market. It's in French language, German, Swedish, Spanish, Portuguese, and they've now done an English version, which is going to be shown in the UK. And I got to take a look at the English version. It's an hour long, 52-minute long show that talks about elephants from the beginning all the way through modern. It's pretty neat.
Set your VPN.
Any relation to a walrus with that type of tusk?
I don't think so. So tusks are pretty common in mammals, right, as weapons and tools for the animals to use for digging things and for fighting other creatures. So camels. Did you know we had camels here? And people associate camels with the Middle East, but camels actually originated in North America. So a different migration backwards from what we were just talking about. They originated in North America and then dispersed to the rest of the planet. So we had animals coming in on Pangea, animals leaving. There were animals that originated in South America, came to North America when Central America came out of the water enough, and vice versa. Passed along the way. The camels went south, became llamas, alpacas, guanacos. Modern camel, like here, dromedary, Camelops histernus, right here. That's an extinct species, and I actually have a bone from Camelops here. So I had passed around the 3D printed model. So this is an ankle bone. It's called an astragalus, and this is what the foot hinges on, right? It's a asymmetrical pulley. And these are common fossils, astragalus are, because they stick around well, and the bone crushing animals didn't eat them or crack them open as much as they did other bones. And so we find them pretty commonly at fossil sites. This one's from Florida camel about 2.5 million years ago, but this is about the size of your average modern camel right here, right? And then here's the Mokelumne camel. So you can see the difference in size. So we've got Titanolopus, which was a Pliocene 5 to 7 million year old camel. And then one of our camels at the Mokelumne that we've determined we have is called Megatylopus, who actually might have been a little bit taller than Titanolopus. So massive camels. Megatylopus probably did not have a hump and may have had a longer neck than what you see there. Here is a foot bone off of a large camel, although this is probably fair amount smaller than what Megatylopus's foot looked like. This is called a metapodial, and this is exactly how the bone came out of the ground, and it was probably torn up into pieces like this by the bone-crushing dogs, as the teeth marks are still in there. So camels have 2 toes. They did millions of years ago, and they still do today. And the more ancient camels stood a little more upright on those 2 toes and cushioned and balanced on that pad of fat that's there. Modern camel is now bearing a little more weight like this. Here's where the 2 toes attached, right here at the end of this bone.
So is that one that you found also?
Yes. This is one I'm working on right now. I've got maybe 30, 40 hours of work into that. So this, again, was a chunk, a pedestal that we took out of the ground. When I first found this, there was only a little bit of the bone showing right here. And I scratched down around it and exposed the end, and it looked like a rib. I thought, oh, we've got a big rib bone. The ribs are pretty common at the site. And then we got the team out there and we started digging down into it, started exposing more, and realized there was more of it. And I've been learning my way around camel anatomy really well, because it's probably the most common critter that we find at the site. And when I got down into here, I knew it was another metapodial, this structure on the camel. And so we took it out as a chunk, and then, so when I got into the lab, then I start chiseling down around it. And I'm about done with it. I think this is as far down as I'm gonna go. I'm gonna keep it displayed in the sediment, which is nice context on where it came from. Yeah. So it's the large astragalus, which the original of this copy is made of. We were out in the field one day, and Professor Daly was digging around in a kind of an erosion ditch, and all of a sudden he's a fairly short man, but all of a sudden he's like this. He goes, "I found it! I found it!" And he's holding up this white thing. I'm like, "What is that? Did you find a softball? What do you got there?" And he had this this astragalus, and then everybody was out there. It was the largest camel part anybody had ever seen. Okay, another one of the camels that we have is Apicamelus, which is a tall, long-legged camelus that developed a long neck like a giraffe, right? And they had spindly legs, may have been 14 feet tall at the shoulders. Some of them, I'm not sure ours were quite that tall, but it's thought that some of the species of Apicamelus browsed as high as 18 or 20 feet in the trees. So if you were a browser, like how the giraffes developed, if you can reach higher than everybody else, you're going to get the goodies up there, right?
Any relation between the two?
No. And so yeah, I just brought that in today. I instead of showing you a photo, I thought I'll bring the real thing in. So here is the toes attached to the left end there, And there's 3 bones in each toe, the phalanges. This is the proximal phalanx or phalange, the uppermost of those 3 bones. And this is off of one of the giant camels, maybe Megatylopus, just a really robust toe bone. And the tapir. So this was a nice surprise. It took us a while to figure it out. When I dug this thing out of the ground, it was upside down. I saw this part of it right here. And it sort of looked like a cobble, but I scratched on it and I could tell it was bone. I excavated around it, popped a chunk out of the ground. When I got it back in the lab and worked my way down around it, unfortunately it broke into 3 pieces. But it went back together perfectly. So a little fracture there, and there was another one over here. But it actually gave us an opportunity to look inside, because this was a very young tapir, a lot like this one here. This is a modern tapir photo from the Dublin Zoo. But it gave us a look inside to see the adult teeth that were loaded up in there underneath the baby teeth. And this opening here is called the ovale, and that's where the M4, the adult molar, is going to erupt out when the critter got bigger. But the teeth are in absolutely fantastic condition. It looks like this thing died, last week. Just beautiful teeth with not a lot of wear on them, which helps to suggest how young it was. It probably hadn't been weaned all that long and hadn't been eating grass too long yet, because the teeth were still quite sharp and beautiful. I found a nice local resource in Jackson. My dentist at Jackson Creek Dental has been helping out with x-rays. So they have a high-end machine there. It's a cone beam 3D scanner. If you go in to get your teeth worked on, or going to get orthodonture, they'll have you put your head in that thing and it spins around like that. It's an x-ray machine. It does 3D. So we're able to put specimens like the tapir jaw in that machine and get a nice look inside of it and see all the structure inside. And we can actually have 3D models even printed off of the files off of that thing. And the funny thing is, because that's my dentist, he attached all the images from that jaw to my file. So I recently went in to get my teeth cleaned, and it was a new hygienist, and she's looking at stuff, and then she's like, and I'm like, oh yeah, don't bother that. That's the tapir jaw, But really fun to get local folks involved like that, with using the x-ray machine. So the baby tapirs sure are cute. So it's called a perseodactyl, which means it's an odd-toed ungulate. It has an odd number of toes. And people, they're very pig-like, right? Look like a pig. They're actually not closely related to pig or swine at all. They're more closely related to horses and rhinos than they are pigs.
Why do the teeth look gold-like?
They're a greenish gold. I'm not sure. That is it's that big, and it's a prize specimen. The neat thing about this tapir is it's very, very small, even in comparative size. So a modern tapir of about that same age would be a fair amount larger than this one. So as we have been trying to figure out who this is, it's led us to genus and species of tapir, which was a little more common on the East Coast in specimens found in Maryland, Tennessee, and Florida. And they were a dwarf tapir, and ours is a good 25 or 30% smaller even than the dwarf. So right now we're just kind of playing with the name of a pygmy dwarf tapir. And whether it's a new species or not, we're not sure yet. And we're hoping to find more tapirs so we can more easily make that decision.
How big are the adults?
Well, those smaller tapirs in the Miocene, maybe that big. Tapirs today, 700 pounds. Again, I'll use a San Diego museum. Yeah, they're big.
So they're going the opposite way.
They're going the opposite way. Yeah, San Diego Museum, or San Diego Zoo, they've got 2 different species of tapirs there, and the big black and white tapirs, like 700 pounds. And they sleep all day long. If you go to the zoo, you're like, come on, get up and do something. They just lay there. And then the Baird's tapir, which is a little bit smaller. So the tapirs got larger. And yes, there were rhinos here. North America, and we have probably, well, we know we have two species, Aphalops and Teleosteris. And the Teleosteris, it's been argued whether they had a horn, hot belly, kind of like a corgi dog with this short legs, and maybe about this big. So fair amount smaller than African rhinos. And I brought a rhino tooth, a chart over here on some of the different parts of rhino that we found.
So you didn't find the horn, so you can't.
No, the horn doesn't. Typically, you don't find the horn. Yeah, and there's a piece of rhino. That was the first piece of rhino actually that I found, and that's just that's a segment of a jaw and then a molar. Horse. We have horses. I actually brought a horse toe with me. So horses are another North American original. They started here back in the Eocene, about this big, and got larger and larger by the Miocene. We were somewhere here in the middle where Mary Chippus is. Horses began with 5 toes. They started to lose those toes. The ones on the outside became less weight-bearing. By the mid-Miocene, they were down to 3 toes, which are the horses that we had, 3-toed horses. They evolved to larger horse with 1 toe, which is the hoof, right? And horses disappeared off of this continent maybe 10,000 years ago. And I've actually been corrected. There's some scientists that say, hold on, they may not have actually disappeared. There is some thought that maybe there was pockets of horses that existed. Some horse material in them in British Columbia, where the horses may have been sticking around the whole time. But the common story is that the horses disappeared off North American continent, but they came back. They made their way back, right, on the ships of Spaniards, and were traded and escaped in the Caribbean islands and Mexico and North America. And the Native Americans, some of the folks, Native Americans, developed a robust horse culture, and that Spanish blood horse made its way back to the continent.
So how about a zebra? Would the zebra be considered a horse?
Yeah, they're very, very close to a horse. Yep. In fact, so it's thought that our Miocene horses may have resembled a zebra with a really thick neck, and it's even been suggested that their coat, their color pattern may have been like a zebra with that light-dark breakup pattern.
How can they guess about that kind of stuff?
I don't know. Yeah, our land tortoise, Hespero testudo. This specimen is the plastron, which is the bottom plate, bottom armor. And this was a smaller tortoise. It was probably a young tortoise, but Hespero testudo was known to get about 1 meter across. Pretty big turtle or tortoise. Late Pleistocene. Ice Age, late Pleistocene, sub 15,000 years ago. I think man may have had an impact on a lot of the animals that disappeared in the late Pleistocene. And a lot of that research is based on butcher sites that are found. And as humans made their way onto this continent, they became much better at hunting these animals and developed tools and weapons that could take them down better. And some of those families and genus of animals may have been a little bit on their way out already because of climate change. As we left the hardest part of the Ice Age, and it was a warming climate. And so humans hunting may have had something to do with their demise on the mastodons and the mammoths. And giant ground sloths, I read a paper about giant ground sloths that existed here and sloth remains that are found in butcher sites. And we're talking ground sloths that were this tall at the shoulders. They were here. Okay, this is the part where Martin passes out the Red Bulls, so people don't fall asleep, right? The geology, it may be, if you're waiting for that, could be your favorite part, but I'll keep it short. But the geology, basically what we're in are sedimentary deposits. And here's a photo in the Mokelumne Channel. This could be a typical site that you'd see. If you drive along through the roads in Calaveras and Amador County, the road cuts, which are a fantastic place to look at geology. You could see this type of thing where you've got different events that come through, right? A lot of sandstone, and then you've got the conglomerates. These are the andesite cobbles, which are really old rocks from the earliest part of the Sierra Nevada basement that have been worn into cobbles through erosion action and then deposited, and then sandstones and cobbles, and then we get into more of the tephra. This is some volcanic materials that are in here, a lot of ash produced by volcanic activity in what is now Ebbets Pass area and along the Sierra crest. And that's where Dr. Kathy Busby's studies come in, studying those volcanoes. So here is a slide. This is from recent publication that we've done, and we presented a talk and a paper at the Geological Sciences of America conference in Denver in early October. And I'm not going to get too much into this and bore you all, but here is the site of present-day Mokelumne crest, and here would be the line of stratovolcanoes that existed before the Sierra Nevada uplifted. And this is Kathy Busby's, about half of her career of work has gone into studying this. So if you know a little bit about the geologic formations of the area, the Valley Springs Formation is what's represented in pink, and the volcanic material that that originates from, we're far over in Nevada, about 2/3 of the way across Nevada, and those channels came all the way across, and that was before the Sierra Nevada was up to stop them, and they went all the way down to about where the Central Valley is. And then in more recent time, the Miocene, then we're getting the material from these stratovolcanoes in the area of Ebbets Pass, which the Mokelumne Paleo Channel, and here would be our sort of Ebbets area volcanoes here. Cross-section of the Mokelumne Channel, generally in the area of maybe where the fossil sites are. So this would be around the time of deposit, and then we come to present day, and the incision from the Mokelumne River itself has cut down and removed a lot of it, and the material that was there is off down into the Central Valley now. So there's a little bit of that original material left. Here's what the Sierra Nevada looks like today, right? This would all be a presentation completely of its own. If anybody's part of the Geological Society or something, we could do that. We could do a presentation just on the geology. So one of my favorite parts of this study has, surprisingly, I didn't realize how much I'd like it, but is the geochemistry and the geochronology, which is the actual dating of the sediments. And that, so geology and paleontology are joined at the hip. You'll find that most paleontologists are geologists first. In fact, a lot of paleontologists actually don't have a degree per se in paleontology. They've gotten interested in it, but understanding the nuts and bolts of geology and being able to place the setting of those sediments helps you very much date the fossils. So we're going real deep on this to the point where we're doing radioactive isotope studies. And one of the keys is the zircons, which are small grains of zircon material. They're about the size of a grain of sand. In fact, a lot of common sand that you find there will be complete zircon crystals in it. Those zircon crystals were formed in those volcanoes shortly before the volcano erupted in the magma chamber. And there's a complicated crystal lattice that forms in those zircons that allows the scientists to study the crystal structure and the radioactive, the isotope change, which tells us how old they are. And so here's a slide that I've been working on, trying to sort of explain how that works. But when we have the zircon crystal, when the zircon crystal is formed, there's no lead present. Lead is rejected during the birth of the zircon. And after the zircon leaves the volcano and ends up wherever, in the case of our fossil site, we take the sediments that are around the fossils and we analyze it and we can date the zircons. And that'll give us a general idea of at what time the eruption happened and the events. And so we have 100% on the uranium, 0 on lead. As the uranium decays, it becomes apparent to the daughter lead, and that ratio, that difference, then there's a calculation done. Here's the math for you folks that like that. And then it can be determined within about 1% of the age of the zircon crystal. So University of Arizona at Tucson, they have a lasercron facility there that's been running our samples, and there's a photo of the machine there on the left. So UPB is uranium, PB is lead, so it's a uranium-lead study. Laser ablation, that means that the crystal itself is getting zapped with a laser. Inductively coupled plasma is the type of machine, and then mass spectrometry, so that is the way the gases or the sample is being taken over at the end. So it's really precise, and these circle marks are where the laser beam actually hit. And those are precision targeted. The operator actually wanted to do that, and so we're talking something the size of a grain of sand, right? So here's how precise the laser is. And so we get some really tight dates coming off of this. In fact, it's the most reliable method of geochronology for looking at the age of sedimentary basins and the provenance of particular sedimentary units. So our zircons study has told us that our fossil site, which is here, is 8.25 to 8.28 million years old. And then we've picked up a lot of other zircons, which are really interesting. And if we run it out, so here's the dates in millions of years, MA, millions of years. And we go out farther, 1,000 million years. We've got zircons that go to 1,500 million years. Our oldest one is about 1,700 million years. That's 1.7 billion, right? So these zircons stick around for a long time, and they're in complete form. They're a little bit rounded, a little bit weathered on the edges, but they're mostly complete. So it's a really neat part of the study that we're doing. And we're going to be running more zircons, and we're also doing argon dating, which is using the tephra or the pumices and different volcanic origin for the material. And those samples are run up at Oregon State University in their Triga 2 nuclear reactor. So the samples actually get juiced up in the reactor for about 3 weeks, and then the measurements are taken as they're cooling down.
So the ones that are 1 billion years old, is that the magma?
Yes, they're volcanic.
The ones that was over 1 billion years ago?
Correct. And who knows where they came from? Those didn't come from the Ebbets Pass volcanoes. Kathy Busby could tell you all about it and give you some ideas, but maybe Yellowstone and other places where those eruptions occurred.
Other question, what was the condition of the Sierra Nevada at 8.2 million years ago?
Do we have any geologists here? These are where the arguments start on the age of the Sierra, but no. No, it was maybe, Kathy Busby says maybe a range of foothills. The Sierra Nevada itself, there wasn't much. The Oligocene older Valley Springs channel had already been cut off at about 8 million years ago. So there was enough there, and the altiplano of Nevada itself had already probably started to drop, and there was a barrier that stuff wasn't getting across. But there was some type of Sierra Nevada in its young state, I think, at 8 million years ago. But there's a lot of, if you Wikipedia that or Google how old are the Sierra Nevadas, you'll see 4 million years. But then there are scientists that have spent half their career studying it, and they'll say, no, it's older, it's 10 million years, because we're seeing these basement rocks, and so it's highly debatable. Okay, so here's a specimen here at the museum. And on my first visit, I saw it in the glass case down here, and Chuck was kind enough to take it out and let me have a look at it. And it was labeled as a turtle Pleistocene 2.5 million years old. And I got some photos, and we did a quick measurement of it. And I ran this up the flagpole with some tortoise and turtle folks that I know, and it was pretty quickly determined that it's a tortoise. Tortoises are turtles, but turtles aren't tortoises. If that makes any sense. So tortoises are a land version of turtle. They will go in the water a little bit, but and the more ancient tortoise didn't have the ability to dig like modern tortoises do, and their jaws were different, so they may have been eating different animals. Land tortoises are almost completely vegetarian, where terrapins and turtles are more omnivorous and will eat different stuff. But it's all agreed that this is a tortoise, and it is the genus is Stylomus. Species still unknown. We may not be able to figure that out. But when I was looking into Stylomus, I found some real obscure literature that described a tortoise recovered in California, a single specimen. The species name was S for Stylomus, and Calaveras. And I was like, wonder if that's from Calaveras County. And Calaveras means skull in Spanish, right? So it may have a different, origin on the Calaveras, but I'm wondering if that came from Calaveras County. So I sent that back to my tortoise guy down at UC Fullerton, and he is trying to find, so supposedly there's one specimen of that Calaveras somewhere in a museum, and he's trying to figure out where that is, and maybe match up if by chance this specimen that ended up in a collection that was donated to this museum might be Calaveras. How cool would that be? But Stylomus mostly it was common in South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, that type of area. And Chuck, are you in here? It's not really known exactly where this. He had to go down where this came from. There wasn't really good paperwork that came with this thing, but that's really cool. You get the chance down in the building below us. Go check it out. Okay, and over at the Calaveras County Museum in San Andreas, they contacted me and said, "Hey, we found this tusk in our basement, and you want to take a look at it?" So that thing weighs probably 100 pounds, and it's not fossilized, which is really cool. They got a gang of people and brought it up the stairs out of the basement, and we got the chance to go take a look at it. My initial feeling was that it's from a mammoth, and that's because of that radical curve that it had. The mastodons typically had tusks like this and this and this, but that thing was very much a mammoth type of thing. The records that came with that say that it came out of a hydraulic mining site, out of a bank at a hydraulic mining site somewhere farther up in the middle part of the county. I'm afraid I can't remember exactly where, and it was donated many, many, many years ago. So I looped in our experts on the proboscideans, and there was some gut reaction that, it's got to be a mastodon or a mammoth because of the curve. But we have a scientist at the University of Michigan who's very, very qualified that said, hold on. He goes, I actually think it's a mastodon. And the mastodon would be like this here, the American mastodon, which was known to have a tusk kind of like that. So Jeanette Perlow now is local, and she came up a few weeks ago, and we went over to the museum and took a look at it. And it's in a glass case now in the main hallway there. And we didn't have enough people. We felt like it was safe to wrestle that thing out, but we're going to go back with a piece of foam and get enough people and get it out and lay it down. And we're actually going to sample it. We're going to take a little bit of material, do some further studies on it, including carbon dating, and we're going to try and figure out who it was.
So which one's more exciting, if it's mammoth or mastodon?
I like it all, but in terms of importance to science, either one. And it's thought that both of them did exist here. Well, we know mastodon now for sure, but the mammoths were probably walking around here as well. Yeah, I love how Gary Larson, he used to draw his cave people, their butt cracks went, all the way up to their plumber's back, right?
Do any of your children want to go into this type of?
No. So some of you met my 18-year-old Kit, who's been sitting out there the whole time. He's heard all this, been through it so many times. And so I take him out to the site with me, but I have to like twist his arm to go out if we have certain things like plastering and stuff we have to do, and we need some muscle. I'll take him out there, but he's not really into it. Someday he'll get older, he might appreciate it more. When I was his age, if I got the chance to work on it, I certainly would have. But no, my kids aren't that all that interested. He's into cars and stuff like that. Yeah, and girls. For sure. Yeah, so you asked excellent questions as we were going along, but does anybody have more questions? It's really important. So what this site does is it is helping us really fill in some gaps in this part of Western North America on what was going on during the late Miocene. So we certainly know what was going on during the Ice Age. We've got places like La Brea tar pits, right? If you haven't been to La Brea tar pits, you should go. If you go to the LA area, it is incredible. It'll blow your mind on what's going on in there. But that's young stuff, much more recent in time. And a lot of Pleistocene material from places like Diamond Valley Reservoir. But the late Miocene, there's some pretty good deposits in Oregon, not so much in California. And this site is really, really rich. And you saw that faunal list we have. That's only a part of it. We've got a lot more animals. We haven't figured out who they are yet. And the plants, we're going to be able to determine things like climate. Yes.
Building in the county for historical purposes?
I hope so. It would be a dream of mine is if we could have a small museum or a visitor center. So short term, and I just had this conversation with my boss this week, is we are going to start curating some smaller displays that might be able to go on long-term sort of loan to places like this. And we'd like to do a display that can travel, and we can put it in a cargo trailer and take it to schools. And then we can leave it there for a while. And then that can be used, the teachers can use the material for classes, but then we can have the scientists come in, Kathy Busby and Professor Daly and Hilton and myself. We can go in and talk to these kids, and use these displays sort of as props that way. But to build a small museum specifically about the site would be fantastic. I think we're going to have to get a little farther into the project, I think, before that happens.
Do you have a website that you update saying we found another?
No, we don't. I know there isn't the time. There isn't the time for it right now.
There's nothing else to do but to design his website.
Yeah. So the Gateway Science Museum has some stuff on their site.
Because an 18-year-old kid should do this.
Also, East Bay Mud, we have on our website, we have something called the Story Map, which is a little bit of an interactive program that was built on the ArcGIS platform, and it tells the story of how the discovery went down. But we're not really doing any updating on it. And then there's been some stuff on TV, and there's going to be some more stuff on TV. We've been involved in different programs. I know. I'm afraid at this point we don't have the staff for that. Yes?
I didn't fall asleep when you showed the picture of the strata. How thick of a band of strata are the fossils found?
That's a great question. We don't know how thick it is for sure, and it's different from location to location. And what really was scrambling my brain to start with was the actual geologic formation that it was in. So we get these channelized things out there. You'll get an Oligocene deposit that has channels in it, and then the Miocene deposits laid over the top of it, and things are like that. So you can find different ages of rock side by side. And so I'm looking at fossils, and then 20 feet away, there's formation that is, 30 million years old. So we were like, huh. But how thick it is, we're not sure. That's a good question. In places, it's not very thick, and then other places, who knows how deep it is. We haven't been to the bottom of it. So are there bones still much deeper? Most likely. Yeah, we probably walk over stuff out there all the time. We're never even going to know it's there because we can't see it,
They're all in the same strata?
Yes.
How long do you think you'll be working that area?
Well, I have about 9 years left in my career, so with East Bay. So that's a good question. So the main fossil site, if I were to compare what we've done in the last 2 years as the gold rush, the 1850s, we're in probably about 1865. So the probably where we're walking around, just bing, 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 there's fossils everywhere, that's really slowing down. Still finding them though. We're working on an interesting skull right now I found about a month ago. And at first I thought it was a piece of a tortoise sticking out, and it turns out it's the back of a skull, probably of a, I was thinking horse at first, but now I'm wondering if maybe it's a tapir or a peccary. And so we're almost done with the pedestal. Next day, probably about 3 hours, we're going to break it off. And then it's going to go into the lab at Chico State, and they're going to prepare that and figure out what it was.
You were saying that you use x-rays in imaging these. Has anyone played with ground penetrating radar for finding fossils?
Yeah, I actually contacted a guy, a ground penetrating radar expert, and it's almost for sure not going to work at our site. And one of our scientists has used that technology a lot in other places, and the way our sediment and ground is, it's not going to work for us. I wish it would, but they've done that in like in the Dakotas and eastern Wyoming, and had some results in some of the sediments from it. Yeah. Anybody else? Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Been to the, I think it's a mammoth dig near Keystone, South Dakota?
So there's a mammoth site near Hot Spring, near Rapid City, just south of Rapid City. Yes, I've been there. Yeah, cool place. And we've actually reached out to them on a few things, to kind of get their opinion on it. And that's one of those places. It's in a quarry. It's in a building, kind of like this, where you can go in, right, and see the dig inside. That was a neighborhood. They were excavating to build a neighborhood, and dug up those bones. And the developer himself said, "Stop. We're going to protect this." And they, yeah. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
They found some Indian stuff, would you consider going there and checking out to see if there's any,
Where is that?
down on Highway 4 where they're redoing the road?
Oh, I'm not aware of that, and yeah, the archaeological stuff, I don't usually work with that. And normally those type of settings, they will call licensed scientists, paleontologists with a environmental science firm that will come out. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, everybody.